Now let's talk about transferring the texture from one mesh to another. That might happen to you more often than you think, just because sometimes you just don't lay your UVs out in the most efficient way possible, but you started texturing, something came up, or you forgot to UV something, and now you need to rearrange your UVs. How do I not waste that texture from before and not have to start things over? So I'm going to use Ember Spirit from Dota here as an example. This is a Valve asset, not mine, but I just had it on hand, and I think it would showcase what I'm doing pretty easily here. So if you look at this, let me open up the UV editor, and that's under Windows Modeling Editors, UV Editor here. I can also just open up the UV Texture Editor from my shelf here, and same thing. So these are the UVs, they're fine. I'm not trying to critique it or anything, I just want to use an example here. In case you're wondering though, this is kind of stretched funny. And the reason why that's stretched funny is because this is a non-square texture. But I'm sure you talked about that in your other classes here. By default in Maya, though, you probably had this turned on, and then there's a gradient here that's kind of distracting to work from. And you hit this image button, that'll turn it off, and then you have your standard grid for UVs. So in my second mesh here, this is moved to the side here. If I click on this, if I hit Shift H, I have this hidden. This is a hidden object. So you can select any object you want. Hit H, that'll hide it. I can select that item again, that object again. Hit Shift H, so unhide it. Or if I'm hiding a bunch of things, then I can hit Control Shift H, and that shows the last hidden object. So here's this other object, and let me move this to the side. It's locked. For some reason this is locked, so let me select all these transforms, and then I'll unlock them, and I want to put these side by side here. Okay, so I have these side by side. These are the UVs that I changed it to. I basically made it worse, but it's just more, how do I transfer this to that? Right. Let's just say this is the optimum layout, and I want to just reuse this texture. So this is going to be pretty easy. I'm going to close this out, and what I'm going to do instead is I'll go to the render menu, and then go to the lighting and shading. Under the baking, there's a transfer maps button here that opens up this menu here. Alternatively, if you're not comfortable with using the spacebar to navigate Maya, you can switch from modeling, which is the default, to rendering here, and then go to lighting shading and hit transfer maps. And there we go. Right. This is a pretty easy UI here. Whatever your mesh that you have selected to begin with is going to be the targets, and then all I need to do at that point is click on my source, open up the source meshes. I'll do an add selected, and then it'll do like a search envelope. That's basically how far off it always like push. It's like a cage, right? It's like a normal map baking cage. So 1%. That I think default's fine. These are basically the same mesh, so it's just different UVs, so it's not a big deal. And then here you can choose what exactly do you want to bake. Do you want to bake a normal, displacement map, diffuse? I'm going to uncheck normal map, that's the default, and then I'll hit diffuse color map, and then let me change this to the arts tutorials, and we'll call this something. I'll call it render. I typically put render Maya in front of my Maya renders just because I'm usually baking in several applications, and I don't really need many Maya bakes, so I'll just call it render Maya. Render Maya right there. By default, you'll probably have Connect Maps to Shader turned on. That's just basically going to make a new shader for you in your Hypershade for this new transferred map. I'm going to hit Snow though, and I don't need that. And then let's open up the Maya common outputs. Here I can define what scale is. I think this is adopting the original. So this original is at 2048 by 1024. We can hit the keep aspect ratio. That way, if I up this, double it, or half it, it'll stay locked together. And then transfer in world space or object space. So world space is going to require that you have these objects overlapping each other. Because if I transfer maps now, this won't transfer correctly. But if I switch to local space or object space, it won't matter. I can have it out here and it'll transfer fine. And this hit ignore mirrored faces. And then I think that's usually about it. Sampling quality, I guess you could just go high. Filter size, I think the lower the value, the better. The better the quality the render is, so I'll take that down to 1. And then I'll leave the Gaussian filter type. That's usually fine. Right. Then I'll hit bake. And you can see the progress bar on the bottom left here. This shouldn't take too long, but this is a fairly large map. And then as it's doing it, you can just navigate to my render folder. I'll pull up both the regional texture and then the source texture and then the target texture when it's done. I should have just lowered this down for the sake of rendering here, but while we're doing that, let me pull up some of these textures. Okay, so this is the original texture that they provided here. You know what, I want to cancel out this render. Hopefully it lets me. Sometimes you can escape easily while Maya's doing something. Same thing in ZBrush. Sometimes it's pretty quick to just hit escape and it'll stop. But in this case, I think it's not going to let me. Oh, there we go. So I'm going to take this back down, do like a preview, and I'll turn the filter size back up. So just so you know, when you do this for real, I want you to take this filter size back down to 1, take the sampling quality high, and then let's do something a lot smaller. Let's do like a 1024. Oops. Okay, that's 12, and then I'll bake that. Okay, so that baked a lot faster, and then okay, so I'm getting this instead of a version of this. I think that's because my shaders are messed up. So then if we go to the Hypershade, which is under Windows rendering editors, and then Hypershade here, this is going to open up the material editor. So I can zoom in and out the same way within this so I can see things better. I'm going to make sure that this is pointing in the right direction. For some reason, oh, interesting, it has an actual shader here. That's surprising. Let's just make a new shader, because I think maybe there are probably 2 things that are happening. One, this is a custom shader, so it's not like a default Maya shader, so Maya may not know where exactly this color input is coming from. And then 2, it may not actually be pointing at the right file path for the textures. So I'm going to start this over. I'm going to hit the right click button. I'm going to right click and I'm going to make a new material. We'll just do new Lambert because we don't need any specular. And here I will open up in the color menu right next to the checkerboard. That is very unintuitive, but basically this lets you input a file, and then in the image name of this file or of this shader, I can hit that folder button. Now I can navigate to my Dota folder, and then I think it's in here somewhere. There we go. Alright. So I've made a new shader. I'm going to rename this. I'll double click this. I'll change the name to Ember Diffuse, just so I know for sure. And then I'm going to right click this, or I'll select my object. I'll right click the material, assign material to selection here. Okay, so you'll see that it's breaking here. This is actually fine, but the reason why it's doing that is because there's an alpha channel in that texture. So if I go down to transparency, I can just right click the transparency text here, and I'll hit break connection, and now I'm back to a diffuse texture here. Okay, so with that, now when I do a transfer maps, I'll bake this again. I get my proper texture here. Right, so it's basically transferred this to there. Why don't we? Oh, this is interesting. So it should be. This is a square texture. I don't know why they UV'd it like it's something else. So let's take this back to 1024. I'll bake that. Now when I open this, so now I have that texture correct. So I've gone from here to here. And yeah, that's about it. That's about it for the transfer maps. As far as transferring the UVs or the texture from one mesh to another with different UVs. Just to kind of wrap it up though, this is basically how you would transfer, how you'd bake normals in Maya as well. You just turn on your normal. You'd have all your high-res objects inside of your source meshes, and then you can put one singular target mesh or a few singular target meshes up here. Adjust the envelope size, and you're ready to bake out your texture or bake out your normals.